Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to SIGOS App Experiences webinar on mobile testing with Appium and continuous integration. My name is Margarita. I'm the Director of Marketing for App Experience. In today's webinar, we'll cover the ever-popular open source test automation framework, Appium, as well as the fundamentals of continuous integration, the best practices for creating and designing a solid test framework, as well as showing you some live demos for how to run Appium on real mobile devices. And if you're still on the fence about testing on real devices, please check out our recent blog post, appropriately named Why and When You Need to Test on Real Devices. Our speaker today is James Koch from Quillmont, who will introduce himself in just a minute, as well as Patrick Coulter, CEO of Quillmont, who will join us during the Q&A portion at the end. But before we start this webinar, I just want to run through a few quick items. As I mentioned, at the end of the webinar will be dedicated to a Q&A as time permits. So if you look in your control panel, you'll see a question section where you will be able to submit your questions. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar. Patrick will be going through those questions and fielding them to James and perhaps answering some himself. If you had a question and we weren't able to answer it, please send us your questions and comments to our team and we'd be happy to answer them for you. Also in your control panel, if you look in, there's a tab called Handouts. There you can download a handout on Appium with App Experience, the Appium integration with App Experience. And that's about it. Without further ado, I'll pass it off to James, and I hope you enjoyed the webinar.
Thanks, Margarita. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. Just to give you a little bit of background on myself, my name is, as Margarita said, James Koch. I'm a certified software tester and an active member of the ISTQB. I'm a writer for softwaretestacademy.com and will be presenting at the Star East 2017, actually giving a talk on Appium and continuous integration. The talk today is going to be really focused around testing and testing on real physical devices with SIGOS App Experience. Just to get a little bit more background on you guys, I'm going to open up a poll, and the first question we're going to ask everybody is launching right now. Are you currently using App Experience to execute your functional regression tests? And I will give this polling about 30 seconds, 35 seconds. Looks like 50% of you guys have voted already. Alrighty, 35. Polls are closed. Let's share the results with you guys. Okay, so a lot of you folks right now are not using any tools for functional regression testing. You know, the question might be a little vague. Any functional regression testing on mobile devices, whether that's you have a team of 5 testers, each one of them has an iOS and an Android device, and they run their tests. So it's an interesting, about half of you guys are not using any solution, and I'm here to tell you that we're going to get you guys going with Appium and App Experience. So our next question, and this is mainly geared towards those of you who checked yes, that you are using some sort of tools and some sort of framework. Do you currently use Appium or Selenium for test case development in your test automation framework? Again, I'll give another 30, 35 seconds to answer. Okay. So wow, we have a lot of people using Appium or Selenium, which is really great. And if you have a good understanding of Appium and the Selenium project, you're going to understand exactly what's going on, how we're extending our framework. Instead of reaching out to a Selenium grid and running our tests that way, we're going to be reaching out and setting up our Appium server on Device Anywhere. Device Anywhere is really responsible for all of that. So this talk is going to be really productive for you folks. And this goes out to all my developers out there and testers. Does your team use GitHub or SVN or any other repository for source code management? So you might have 3 or 4 developers working on a project. Each one of them has some specific, you know, place where they're storing their code, and that's how we're managing our software. All right. So wow, about half of you guys are using GitHub. That's my go-to as well, and our organization's go-to. And lastly, this question is about continuous integration. Does your team already have some automated process for compiling, testing, and deploying your application builds? All right. So that's awesome. A lot of the group is using, if you're using Appium with Jenkins, this talk is going to make a lot of sense to you as well. For those of you who are not or who are doing this process manually, we're going to talk about all the efficiencies that you're going to be gaining with through continuous integration and starting to automate this process into a repeatable process that you can do periodically to improve your software builds. So that's it for the polls. And let's get back in. Let's start off talking about what Appium is for those of you who have never seen Appium before. Appium at its heart is a web server that exposes a REST API. It uses HTTP JSON wire protocol to communicate between your test script, so whatever client library you're using, the actual Appium server, and any devices you want to be working with. So we send a request in the form of a request to establish a session with Appium, and
Hey, James.
Appium uses, yes,
James, this is Patrick. Your screen might have froze here. Is there a way you can try to refresh that before you continue?
yep. Can we see
Yeah,
my screen?
that looks better. Thank you.
Sorry, folks. Was showing you a diagram and you couldn't even see it. So like I was saying, the client libraries are written in whatever language you choose, whether it's Python, Ruby, or mine's Java. I think 76% of the people using Appium today are using the Java client. And we make requests to our Appium server, which uses the native instrumentation, Google UI Automator and Xcode instruments to execute the commands on your devices, whether it's an emulator or simulator, or whether it's a real physical devices. This graph represents a local Appium setup. So what Device Anywhere has done is taken, SIGOS App Experience has done is taking the 2/3 of it, and your automation, your script is speaking directly to the Device Anywhere Studio, and that's what's responsible for starting a new session, selecting any of the devices that we call in our test script, and sending our results back. You could have this whole thing set up in your own shop. Again, this goes back to those of you who are doing this manually. If you have 5 iOS and 5 Android devices, why not wire them up into a device farm, if you will, and be able to deploy your application and run these tests in parallel? So this would be done with the Selenium grid to execute tests in parallel. Right now, exactly what we're doing is, again, SIGOS App Experience is responsible for starting the Appium session, selecting the device, and conducting all the functions right on their server. So let's talk about Appium's philosophy and how App Experience has taken it, and these four principles really still hold true with the tool. You shouldn't have to recompile your app or modify it in any way to, using UI automation and UI Automator under the hood. There's no need to add anything into your application. You shouldn't be locked into into a specific language. Like I was saying, our client libraries are written in all of the most popular object-oriented programming languages. I'm most comfortable with Java, so that's exactly what I'm going to be showing you. Mobile automation frameworks shouldn't reinvent the wheel. So the Appium project was really picked up and ran with the architecture for Selenium WebDriver. Which has been the standard for automating web browsers. So they said, why do anything different for mobile? And the fact that this tool is free and open source, now it's giving even the smallest test teams the ability to create a rich, vigorous suite for their regression testing, and they're able to deploy their tests on real physical devices, whether they're hardwired into your laptop or whether you're using a device cloud like App Experience. So if you're setting this up for the first time, Appium has, since this presentation actually got started, they've came up with a new Appium desktop application. I'm not going to be showing that. I'm still going to be using the old version of the app, and I do a lot of things with their command line tools. You need some sort of IDE. That's what you're going to be developing your Java and your Selenium code in. TestNG or JUnit are your annotation frameworks that are going to control the flow of your test cases. And to achieve continuous integration on real physical devices and to be working with both native and hybrid applications, you're going to need Android Studio or the standalone and Xcode with command line tools. You need Android Studio and command line tools to actually, run the native automation or the instrument, to use their native instrumentation. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about Selenium and how to actually create this framework and what's going on with Selenium. How does Selenium play a part with this? So iOS and Android driver, again, Selenium has been the standard for automating these web browsers. Why do anything different for mobile? So what iOS and Android driver do is they encompass everything WebDriver does, but allows for more platform-specific commands, iOS-specific or Android-specific commands. Appium driver was created to encompass both of those in subclass elements as mobile elements, as well as being able to provide your test code, being able to provide the Appium server with very specific Appium commands. So why choose Appium? Obviously, it's free. That's a big selling point. That a lot of people. It's very, very got a great community backing, and I think that's what the support. That's where all my support has come from. It's one of the most plug-and-able tools on the market today to start creating your test code. If you're familiar with the Selenium grid, that's how we start doing parallel testing with Appium. Each node on the Selenium grid is responsible for its own Appium session, and we'll start talking about Appium sessions when we get into the examples. Jenkins works great with Appium and the command line tools. We're able to run this whole automation suite right from Jenkins. You never have to go into an IDE again when you set this up if Jenkins is responsible for actually kicking off and running your tests. So not only are you able to, with Jenkins and the Selenium grid, run on your local devices, you're then able to deploy your application with your application test code as well as your application code to SIGOS App Experience. So let's talk about continuous integration. It's not just a buzzword. Um, Continuous integration is a process where your developers and testers are checking code into a common repository several times during a product's development at different phases. You might have different, you might have two testers working on a specific feature, one developer, two testers working on a different feature, and one tester for that feature. When they start merging code, some steps can kick off, and we have a repeatable single automated process that encompasses these parts of the software development lifecycle. We're going to be mainly focused on the testing aspect of this, testing and deploying your application to SIGOS App Experience, but there'll be a little bit of configuration management when it comes to setting up the server and setting up this continuous integration configuration. So the process, like we were saying, when code gets checked in, we could start linking and compiling your application code. Once all of that code is linked and compiled, we can kick off some build acceptance tests, which is going to make sure that all of these individual pieces of the software are working in unison. We're making sure we're going through a full regression and making sure that no area of the software affects any other area. If all of our build acceptance tests pass, we're then able to deploy this application all in this one single repeatable automated process. We're then able to deploy the application into a test or production environment. From there, you're able to execute your regression tests, either functional or performance tests, in the actual environment that your application is going to be under. And lastly, it provides some really good reports, and this is all going back to the annotation frameworks that you use, whether it's a TestNG or a JUnit framework. You're able to produce results of your builds and give status updates. Okay, this is exactly where this iteration is, and this is the status of this iteration, pass, fail criteria. So I'm glad to see that so many of you guys are using GitHub like me. So you're going to know exactly what we're talking about here with Xcode and Android. Xcode and Android Studio both have their plugins that allow your developers to check your code in to GitHub. And GitHub is a really great free open source. There's a paid for subscription. But I really like GitHub because everybody seems to be plugging into it, just like Appium. So Jenkins in this setup, again we're going to explain this setup like a local Appium setup. Jenkins is scanning GitHub for any time changes are pushed to our Xcode project or our Android project. And it doesn't matter if you're maintaining your test code in one single file, or if you're maintaining a single Xcode or a single iOS test code base and an Android code base. Hybrid or Cordova applications are a little bit easier to manage because there's only a single test base, code base. So Jenkins will see, okay, we have changes pushed to our Android project. So let's build the application, and then let's use Selenium Grid to launch on whatever devices that we say that we specify in our configuration. We're going to say launch it on 3 separate, three devices for Android. Well, each one of those gets their own particular Appium session. When we're testing on SIGOS App Experience and we're deploying this framework to SIGOS App Experience devices, when projects are checked in, Jenkins then reaches the SIGOS App Experience server, which is responsible for starting the Appium sessions and choosing the devices, executing all of the functions, and then returning results. So again, Jenkins is the process, or Jenkins does three things. It's part of the build process, it's part of the testing process, and again, after all this executes, we can then deploy it into a production environment for further testing or test environment. Before I get into the demo, I just want to talk about some best practices from a QA perspective. What you've heard me describe almost as test-driven development. We're saying that test-driven development is a newer theory or method to build applications, but it's a really effective way to get all of your unit testing out while developing. So how it'll work is a tester will write a test case and give it to the developer, and the developer will use that as their guidelines for creating whatever feature is under test. And they'll just create the minimal software to make that test case pass. Then another test case will be created, and the developer will go through the same process until every single feature of the application is created. And look at that, all of your unit testing has gone, has been conducted. When code is checked in to GitHub, we can do our build acceptance tests. So that's just one way that people are implementing test-driven development. Keep your organization's requirements, keeping them readily available for your developers to be able to see is key, because too often traceability gets overlooked. So you want steps, you want requirements for your test cases, you want requirements for your features when your developers are getting them, so they know exactly how and what function do they serve, what should they be performing. And exploratory testing, while it's not formal, it's really important to conduct some sort of exploratory testing on your applications. Users aren't always going to take the happy path. They're going to find some sort of way to break your application. So testing for that before it's actually in the public's hands is a way to eliminate some errors. And I love to show this example because it takes me back to high school math. ABC, there's 24 ways to test ABCD. ABCD is the permutation, right? So there's 24 ways to just test 4 combinations of actions. So if you're tired of listening to me talk and hear me talk, let's get into the demo portion. So I'm going to show you a few different demos. The first thing I'm going to do is show you guys a test, if you've never used App Experience before, what it looks like to create just a simple record and playback execution of an application I've built and some test code that I created. We'll execute this test on a local Appium environment. Then we'll execute this Appium test on SIGOS App Experience devices. And lastly, we're going to take the human component out of it, and Jenkins is going to be responsible for launching your Appium's tests on the App Experience devices. So if you're brand new to it, here is the App Experience, or the App Studio. And I have a simple application that I created. All it is just 2 fields and a button. And it is going to sign in. That's its only function. It has a home page and it has a login page. And our test case is simply going to send the username and password. And how it's doing that is its first step is to find and touch the username field. It'll send the correct password key. It will send the username field and the password. So you can create your actions and then link them into test cases. So for instance, I can add another action if I want to open the application first. So I created an action called open app. And what that will do is simply just go out and open the application. So now I'm going to show this exact same test case that I recorded and played back, written in Java. So we have two fields that we're sending the username field, the correct password. We're sending password field, the correct login, and lastly, we're doing some, we're clicking the submit button, and we're making sure some text is displayed, that our text box is displayed. So here is the old version of the Appium server. Again, you can start this all off via command line if you'd like. And I'm passing in the server my capabilities to my test device. So notice a few things. We have the app package and the main activity. And we're passing the server as well, the argument for my emulator. This is the same values that I'm passing in before my tests. Remember how we talked about test.ng as being our annotation, setting up how we're going to execute this? Before the test, we're passing our driver, the capabilities we specify, the capabilities object, and the location of our Appium URL. We are doing any actions, and I don't any actions that you wish. You can have multiple tests in this if you'd like. Again, this is just a simple login application and a login example. After the test, you can tear it down. You can run through and you can quit the application if you'd like, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to right-click, run as a test.ng test. So we can even see it goes a little bit faster here using Appium than actually the record and playback script and app experience. We can see my results from the execution. And this is just a simple test.ng report showing the actual method that passed. You can use this eventually in our continuous integration and work with that, so you could produce it or send you an email with the index HTML file of your execution after each time it runs. So again, what's happening in our desired capabilities is we're passing it the location of our local Appium server. See our address and our port. Now what we wish to do is to run this test and use the app experience device. So in order to do that, on GitHub, SIGOS posted this mobile device, mobile testing helper, and this is the framework that I've worked into mine. All we're doing is we're simply passing our access server URL. When you log into SIGOS app experience, this is what you're looking at. This is the address for mine. And it passes some credentials and the device that I wish to work with. So if we notice, this is the exact same test case. We're setting it up with the same capabilities. The only difference, so we're passing the same capabilities to our driver instance. The only difference is now our Appium URL is being set by the mobile test helper. It's being set in as a variable and passed to this method. So let's see this running in action. So you can see already my device has been acquired. It revokes the device from my local setup, and it acquires the device for me. And we start the Appium with a new session ID. And instead of setting this prior to, you can hard code in the value of the Appium server. They've made it so you can take and start the Appium session right inside your device, right inside your device screen, and you could just copy that logo. But you could copy that URL. What we're doing is we're calculating that it's going to be set dynamically. We're saying start the Appium session remotely. We don't want to have to go in and physically start this each time, right? We're automating the entire process through our mobile device helper. And we can see it's sending the exact same commands, and it's doing the exact same thing that you would see if you were launching this on your regular emulator. But instead, this is a real physical device that we're just pointing our test case to execute on. So how are we going to take this project and take the human element out of this even further? How is Jenkins going to manipulate this test case? What we're going to do is export this test case, or we're going to export this whole entire program with its main function. We're going to export it as an executable or runnable jar file. And this runnable jar file now should give us the same command line print. So I'm actually even going to close down Eclipse to prove to you that Eclipse is now completely out of the picture. So I'm going to change directories to my where the jar is located on my desktop. Okay, we can see the device was then acquired, and it started a new Appium session. Let's see if it doesn't like me throwing so many commands at it all at once. So this process that I just did, where I changed directories to the jar file, and that's going to be our batch process that we're going to set up in Jenkins. This device wasn't all the way turned up. It wasn't ready for me. Yes. So we had an error because USB debugging was not turned on. I think that has to do with it resetting, actually. But let's see if it works in Jenkins. So I've created this new Jenkins project. And here is what's actually going to control your source code management. Right, we can set this to trigger, or we could have our source code management simply by passing in our credentials and passing the repository URL. We could set up some build triggers with another GitHub plugin. You can build every time changes are pushed to GitHub. We can produce the build, whether it's your test code or whether it's your application code. So if you see here, I have this project set up to run every day at 7 o'clock. So that's insinuating that my developers have gone out and all day yesterday. They've created a bunch of application code. My testers have gone out, created the test code for it, and every morning at 7 a.m. We're going to run this test, and that way we can have some sort of kumbaya in the morning and say, hey, why is this part of the application failing? I also have it set up so it runs on the first of every month. There's not 31 days in every month, so you can't really use 31st, or you could use the end of the month. You can use the last day of each month. But I want to set this up that if your organization is or has a new development build once a month, your automation could automatically kick off at on the first of every month at 7 a.m. as well. And the actual process that's going to kick off is we are going to do that same routine that I just did on the command line. We're going to change directories to the desktop, and we're going to launch the Java jar. You can set up some post-build actions if you'd like. If you want to set the status or set the commit status in GitHub, or if you want to email notification with that JUnit or test in G report. However you have your environment set up today, you can be leveraging device anywhere, and you could be running your tests with Appium on real physical devices. So let's see this in action. So when I hit the build now, and I come into my console output, oh no. For starters, we can see that the device was acquired again, so that's a good thing. Now we're waiting for the test to execute. So this process is not meant for us to literally have to sit here and watch all of your tests kick off and run. The best part about automation is we're setting it at 7 a.m. and it's going to run by 9 o'clock in our Kumbaya meeting. We're all ready to go, and oh, why are we? Sorry, Jenkins seems to be failing as well. So there must be something going on with this device, and when that happens, I always go with the restart.
Hey James, this is Patrick. While that device is restarting, I'm going to take a question here that we got. One of them, somebody asked, when do you want to run test cases locally, and when do you want to run test cases in App Experience? And I think the answer to that, the typical thing that people do, is they have a local Appium setup, and that can be like really local. Like everything can be installed on an individual person's laptop, and they might have hardwired devices to their laptop, one Android, one iOS. And typically what you would do is develop all of your test cases and test on those two individual devices. So that's great to get your scripts proved out, to get them in a nice framework if you're using the page object model or something like that. And you can get about 95% of your work done just on your local setup. But then if you wanted to do something that's more scaled and push it out to several different devices, which is always a good practice when testing mobile devices, that's where App Experience comes in. That's where you can get the variety of devices and then run what you've developed locally now inside of a data center. And is the device back up?
It's back up.
Okay.
We're executing. Again, this might not be device. This might not be App Experience's issue. This might be my own network connection. It looks like the device is fully awake and fully capable. We saw how we executed it right from Eclipse. Well, now Jenkins is responsible for doing that execution. So I'll keep going over here, but let's open up the floor for questions. We got about 20 minutes.
Sure, I'll take this part, James. I'll read you some questions here that just came up. First question, how do you run a suite of tests or multiple tests at once?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, we can use the Selenium grid as well as setting up a suite of tests to run with testng. So where we're passing in these variables and we're hard coding them in, we could be setting them dynamically either through a UI that you set up. You know, you could create your own web service that says launch these test cases, or you can be but again with device farm or with device anywhere. And look at that, we finished with success. Sorry guys, I wasn't sharing the execution.
I think we
Like I
caught
was
the
saying,
tail end of it there. That's a good screen to end on.
yeah, and look, it worked. No, so I'll open up my application code again, and we'll talk about that. So in our mobile device helper, we're calling out again another. It's a hard-coded value. We're saying that launch this device with this MCD, but again, we can instead of hard coding that value in, we can either pass in a second one, and now we're going to say reach both app experience devices, right? So in MCD1, we can create a second integer, and we can just assign it 9999. And now everything that's duplicated, we'll just duplicate each method. We'll just use each method twice and say, hey, let's work with MCD1 and MCD2.
Okay. Another question here. Can you execute tests on iOS and Windows phones for Jenkins?
Yes, yes. So this gets back to my diagram from earlier. If you want to have a single, well, let me start that off by saying Windows. Yes, Appium is supporting Windows apps now. So you can add another branch into this diagram and throw another Appium and a Windows phone in here. So Jenkins, again, you could keep your source code, and instead of saying, let's say Android driver, we can use the iOS driver and it have some sort of conditioning that you can create to either keep one source code or keep multiple source codes. And I like to split it up though. I like to have one code base for Xcode, one for Android, but I like to share all of the methods, right? So all of my methods for testing the application are the same for iOS, Android, or if it's a hybrid or Cordova application. So when the Xcode project is checked into GitHub, it'll start the Xcode project. It'll start the Xcode Jenkins routine, which is responsible for reaching out to and starting an Appium session with our capabilities being set to iOS, or our capabilities being set to Windows.
Cool. So here's a really good question. I know we worked very hard at setting this up, trying to get the Appium scripts to run on physical iOS devices. And we have a person here that's saying that when they run on a simulator, they're okay, but when they run on a real iOS device, they have a lot of extra steps to go to with the Apple development program and whatnot. Can you explain a little bit about the what the process is to get that all working?
Right. So if if you're that has a lot to do with the actual build in Xcode. So I assume that whoever's asking is talking about a a native application that they built using Swift or C, and they're ready to start. Either it doesn't even matter at that point. They're having trouble getting it and passing it the Apple capabilities. If you're looking at the old server, we're just passing in, when we want to run this on a real physical device, we need to pass the UDID to it. Does that make sense? So this device that I have here is my physical test device that I after I get done developing code and check it out. This device is also set up in my Apple development program as a test device that was provisioned for me to test on. So that's one big thing that I see a lot of people running into. If you're testing web applications using Selenium and Appium on iOS devices, you need to start with the Safari launcher. So yes, there is some additional. It's not things that you're adding to your application. It's the things that you need to set up in your test environment and in your test framework. That's what you need to be compensating for. So it's not on Appium's end. Again, you need to set up your device and your application to both go through the code signing process. It's a pain, I know, and it's part of Apple's mantra to be the sole possessor of their software and hardware. So you got to play by their rules.
Okay, great. Little bit of segue there. So you're doing all of your development and testing right now on a Mac, and somebody wants to know if they can do this same setup on Windows and for iOS apps.
For Windows and iOS apps, yes, you can run your test framework using. You can run this whole setup with Jenkins because there's no limitation, because going back to the original diagram, we are saying that it doesn't matter where your test cases are created. It doesn't matter if you don't have Android Studio or Xcode on this machine. Why don't you need Xcode or Android Studio on this machine? Because the native automation instrumentation is all going on under the hood. And again, this whole 2/3 of this diagram is on App Experience. App Experience is responsible for starting the iOS session or the Appium session that reaches out and uses the underlying framework, UI automation, to manipulate the device that again is on their side, on their cloud. So you don't need to, in order to develop iOS applications, yes, you're going to need Xcode and you're going to need a Mac. But if you're developing hybrid applications, or if you're just the tester, you can do that. If you're just the tester, then yeah, you can create all of your iOS tests and launch it through App Experience.
Great. So I got two questions here that I'm going to kind of combine together because I believe the answer will speak to both of them. So the first question is, how do we manage capabilities so that we're running on iOS and Android? And then the second question is asking about the page object model. And I wanted to see if you would just go into the work that you have done with creating a page object model and then addressing why this is good for managing your desired capabilities to run on both of the different devices.
So I'll address the first half first, and the first half is, how do I manage all of this in a single file? You could totally do it. It's completely up to you if you want to maintain all of your test code in a single place. I wish I had this example set up with the Palm to show you exactly what that looks like. But where we're setting our desired capabilities up, we can use some sort of switch statement, if you will, that says if we are using, or if we're reading iOS use the iOS capabilities and pass that capabilities object to the iOS driver instead of the Android driver. Again, that gets down to logic. So with the page object model, you're breaking down your application by two packages. You have your pages and you have your tests. So and these are where your classes are. So in your application pages, that's where you're listing all of the objects, all of the methods that you wish to test. So you're using if you're using the find by technique to find and locate your elements in subclass, so you're using Android find by. Well, you could have a page or you could have a class that's devoted solely to Android and say find element by Android, XPath. Or you can say, and then have another class that is devoted to iOS and say find iOS element by, and then use your Selenium locator, and it's the same thing. So it's creating this infrastructure for yourself. There are tools out there, like we have a proprietary tool, Test Case Manager, that helps you manage this a lot better, and it takes the scripting component out of it. It allows you to set this all up like with a more user-friendly view. And what was the second half?
No, that was it. You took us into Palm, which is where we wanted to be. The next question here is, what other programming languages does Appium support other than Java? Is Python one of them, and do you know of any others?
Yes, I used to know these all by heart, and there's 7 of them. We got Ruby, Python, C, Perl, JS, 5, C#. That's 5. I think I'm missing 2, but no, Java and Python.
Where's this documented so that if they wanted to check it out, where can they see it?
Oh yeah, you can check that out at appium.io. And just look at their client libraries, look at their downloads, and you can see all of them. But I mean, I've done work in the with the Python client libraries before, but that's really it. I've just kept it to Java and Python. So, downloads. Yep, Ruby, Python, Java, JavaScript, PHP. That's what I was missing, and C#. The robot framework, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the robot framework, but that also does extend Appium. So you can start running robot tests with Appium. I've done that before as well.
Great. So I think we have time for one more question here, and it has to do with running on real devices versus running on emulators. Why do we need to run on both, or why is running on an emulator not enough?
I definitely recommend you reading the SIGOS App Experience blog post on this topic. It's really, really vital that you're running tests on real physical devices. Your application is not going to perform the same way, regardless of carrier. There's so many factors that you need to be testing for. And if you're just using simulators or emulators, you're missing out on a lot of the core capabilities of your test cases, right? With emulators, there's certain hardware that you can't manipulate. You're just testing an emulated or a simulated environment that your application is under. You're not testing the actual environment that your application is under. And the only way you can really do that to test against fragmentation is to get out there and be running these tests on real physical devices. So again, some things that you're looking for when you're testing on real physical devices as opposed to emulators. You could be testing against carrier, whatever your telco provider is, Verizon, Sprint, AT&T. You need to be testing against hardware manufacturer, Samsung versus HTC. You could be testing against different units of hardware. You could be testing against different platform versions or different operating system versions. And there's no way you can honestly get results if you're not testing on real physical devices. Otherwise, your results are just, they're too subjective. When you're testing on real physical devices, you're giving your stakeholders the confidence that your application is going to work 100% of the time on all of the devices you say you support. You say you support 500 devices, well, you better test on 500 devices.
All right, great. Well, thanks, James. At this time, we're going to turn it back over to Margarita. Margarita, just so you know, there's some folks here that are asking how they can, if their question didn't get answered, how can they get that answered, and also came up on how to get some more information like the slide deck or if this recording is going to be published somewhere. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to Margarita.
Sure. Thank you so much, Patrick and James. Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. I'd like to just go over a few things, as Patrick mentioned. The first thing, though, is we will have a survey, super quick survey at the end of this when the webinar finishes that we'd love for you to fill out. It gives us an idea of how we did and also gives you the chance to share what topics you'd like to hear next. And as I mentioned in the beginning, in case you came a little bit late, in the control panel, there is a handouts tab with a flyer on the SIGOS App Experience Appium integration. You'll find just kind of like a consolidated information about our integration, as well as our contact information, including our website and email address and social media, links to our social media platforms. I'd also like to mention that App Experience offers a free trial of our manual testing. If you just want to test out our platform for free, that's available for 7 days. And we also offer free demos. So if you want to get a demo of this again, or if you want to get a demo of any of our other products, then please feel free to reach out to us on our website. We have contact forms as well as, or just directly through our email. We integrate with a number of agile tools, including Appium and others. And we also provide professional services if you're interested in, consulting services or scripting services. So for example, if you need help getting your test script automation project jump-started, we can help with that. And finally, as I mentioned, please check out our website. Our details are on that handout. We'll also be sending you a link to the recording so you can watch this again. So please look out for that in your email. And if you heard of Keynote Mobile Testing or Device Anywhere, that's us. We are under a new name now, SIGOS App Experience. And we're the same solid product, but we will be continuing to drive innovation under this new name. And I think that's about it. So if you still have any questions, if we weren't able to get to your questions, just email them to us and we'll totally get back to you. And that concludes our webinar. Thank you again, everyone who joined, and we hope to see you again and see you in our next webinar.